Hi, I'm Tommy Thompson and welcome to Design Dive on AI in Games, where I look at how artificial intelligence impacts game design and vice versa. In this episode I'm boost sliding into the world of high-octane cover shooter Vanquish. Developed by Platinum Games and released in 2010, Vanquish is a third-person cover shooter that at the time caught me off guard by its intensity, fast-paced gunplay and blistering combat. While originally published on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, it received a re-release on PC in 2017 to much fanfare, which was fascinating to watch given the game largely didn't receive that much noise during its initial launch, to the point that GameSpot deemed it the best game no one played of that year. So here we are almost 9 years since its original launch. It's time to visit the game once more and re-examine the AI behaviour in relation to the game's core design, how it meshes with its core mechanics, and builds not just a game that is exciting, challenging and intense, but also one that is a little unbalanced and nonetheless tries to be more accessible for all. For those who've never played it, Vanquish is a third-person cover shooter where players take control of Sam Gideon, a DARPA agent armed with an augmented reaction combat suit who's sent to the space colony Providence sitting in orbit above the Earth. His mission: to take down Russian separatist forces who have weaponized the station and threaten to destroy the USA. It's a weird game that loves to relish in its own absurdity whilst trying to keep a straight face. But while it's incredibly self-aware of the genre trappings it's adhering to, ranging from dude bro shooter types to classic anime tropes, it still manages to do so without it impacting gameplay and core experience. Steve Blum gives his gruffest, jingoistic Steve Blum performance he's ever made as Lieutenant Colonel Burns, alongside edgy good guy Sam by Gideon Emery, a voice actor who strangely has two prominent video game credits in which his character is named Gideon. It presents main characters that are pretty much a pastiche of pretty much every cover shooter protagonist on the market, and true to form, the secondary characters, aka the women, are the budding sidekick on comms and Hillary Clinton, who's found to be a schemy shyster and kills herself as a result. I mean, come on lads, we can do better than this, right? The game relishes in ridiculous quicktime events and hiding squeaky-voiced Pangloss statues for you to shoot as collectibles, but then leans into this absurdity and builds mechanics around it. You've got Sam repeatedly trying to come across as hardcore by virtue of smoking cigarettes, to allowing the player to throw cigarettes as a distraction tactic, which then becomes a running gag of how he can't catch a break and have a smoke in peace. I mean, come on, the closing credits have you shoot the developers as you return to Earth as flying photo-board asteroids. If that doesn't sell to you how tonally inconsistent and kinda bonkers this game is, I don't know what will. When Vanquish came out in 2010, it was the heyday of the cover shooter. What with the first two Gears of War entries popularising this particular branch of third-person genre to great acclaim. It wasn't hard to see that impact on store shelves, from Uncharted and Grand Theft Auto to Splinter Cell Conviction, Army of Two, and 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. Cover shooters were all the rage. But that market saturation perhaps denied Vanquish broader success despite its innovations and mechanics. Although in saying that, its absurdity, its overt anime influences, as well as the price tag, combined with a relatively short campaign, which you can complete in under 5 hours, might have had something to do with it. Despite its shortcomings, there was something endearing about it to me from the get-go. The opportunity to play Gears of War huffed up on 2 litres of Iron Brew, a bag of Skittles and a line of cocaine sounded like an opportunity too good to pass up. And then playing Vanquish, of course. It's been acknowledged in interviews by director Shinji Mikami that the game sought to embrace the anarchy of bullet hell shooters and transpose that reality onto a cover shooter. The final result is fascinating, and merits more than one playthrough to truly embrace it. This is driven in part by the gameplay mechanics working in conjunction with the AI behaviours and building this fast, often anarchic experience. I remember the game fondly from originally playing it back at launch, but it sat in the back of my head for many years, to a point it needed re-examined. Plus, I have a YouTube show now, so I can make loosely constructed justifications for playing games for YouTube. Go me. So let's get into that. I want to talk about what this game does and doesn't do that still makes this rather endearing. The critical components of Vanquish that help it stand out are the 2 additional mechanics you gain courtesy of Gideon's combat suit. The ability to slow down time, to take aim at enemies, and the boost slide mechanic that allows players to move across the combat theatre at blistering pace. Boosting takes the roadie run concept from Gears of War and cranks it up to 11 by enabling you to move around at high speed, shifting from cover to cover with precision and urgency. Meanwhile, the slow-mo allows you to focus on that one target that's bearing down on you, take the shot you need, and remove the pressure being imposed upon you. But what makes it really interesting is that while one or more AI are targeting you, you'd think these mechanics make the game painfully easy, but they come with certain caveats. First, that in order to trigger the slow-mo, you need to move. So while you're relying on that cover to keep you alive, you need to push out of cover to save your life. Diving, sliding, or leaping towards enemies are all valid approaches to initiate the slow-mo attack. The second aspect is the energy meter attached to the combat suit. Both sliding and slow-mo drain the suit, but more critically, in the event you completely exhaust the suit's energy, you have to wait for it to recharge entirely before it can be used again. Perhaps even more interesting is that Gideon's melee attack will largely eliminate any immediate threat, but it completely exhausts the energy tank in the process. What's great about this is that the game inherently wants you to keep moving, but also to stop, take stock, reevaluate before you move again. It provides a fresh take on the expertly crafted reload mechanic of Gears of War, providing an opportunity to make that risky play, but punishes you in the event you fail to control it. It's when all of these mechanics come together that it completely changes the game itself, to a point that the emphasis on the cover shooter is minimised significantly. Your focus is on the carving around the space, taking out as many enemies as you can, exploiting the slow-mo to hit some of the more demanding targets, only to take a moment to recharge before dashing around again. What's powerful about this is it becomes the antithesis of cover shooter design principles. Unlike Gears and its ilk, you don't need to hold the defensive line. Vanquish allows you to define the combat zones, the lines of attack, and the safe areas to recover whenever you want and shift the pace of combat on a dime. But contrary to this, the game punishes you if you do not respect the authority it provides. When you burn out the suit, you're forced to rely on those more traditional cover shooter mechanics to keep yourself alive long enough before you can move again. It shares a lot of similarities with Doom 2016, in that it rewards the player with great agency and control of combat when in constant motion, but punishes you for doing it too much, whilst providing the failsafe of traditional cover shooter behaviour if you overindulge. It's a fun mishmash of ideas, given that without the boost and slow-mo mechanics, the game would be but another cover shooter. But this enhanced mobility and precision fundamentally changes how the game plays and how we express ourselves within the space. It's interesting, given I'd argue a much maligned title that also sought to achieve the same thing was Dark Void by Airtight Games. Published by Capcom in the same year as Vanquish, it added verticality to the cover shooting that mechanically doesn't feel as smooth or as slick as Vanquish, but it's always stood out to me as a fun attempt to innovate in the same space. So my long-held memory of Vanquish was that the AI enemies were challenging and refreshing, but then on playing it again, I didn't see that as strongly as I did once before. Enemies are competent for sure, especially the smaller, more nimbler ones, but fundamentally they're actually rather dumb. Characters frequently don't see the player or pay attention to them, instead prioritising the friendly non-player characters in the scene. For me, playing through the game, it was satisfying but also slightly disappointing, in that the innovative mechanics I just praised are not challenged sufficiently by the enemy designs. Games of this ilk require mechanical balance. If the player has some audacious mechanics, we need to find interesting ways not just to challenge them, but in time counteract them. A great example of AI design counteracting player empowerment is the Batman Arkham series, where not just in the original game but in subsequent sequels, the games introduce new enemies in the combat sequences that negate or counter Batman's mechanics and force us to improve our overall mastery of playing as the Dark Knight. This isn't to say Vanquish doesn't have any variety, nor enemies don't achieve this to some degree. They do, and I'm going to explore that now, but for me it seems that they're limited in scope. We start the game fighting the regular robot grunts, the Gorgies, either standing out in cover or manning turrets. This then expands out into Gorgies with more powerful weaponry and riding on Moa walkers by the time you reach level 1-3, which you can hijack if you exploit the movement mechanics to get in behind the entrenched forces. This opening phase of enemy design helps players get the feeling for basic shooting, moving into cover, and also, if you're feeling adventurous, the ability to start using the boost and slow-mo. Over time, this is expanded such that the boost and slow-mo become more prevalent in the subsequent sequences as target prioritization becomes increasingly more important, but also maintaining a defensive line as larger enemies are introduced. Spheres force us to prioritise targets that move towards us. The chicane droids present mobile cover that needs to be watched carefully, while the jellyfish sequence in Act 1-6 forces that target prioritisation to begin to employ the slow-mo for fear of them getting too close to the convoy. Meanwhile, the first boss enemies begin to appear, with the first Argus robot as early as 1-3. This beast is extremely powerful and forces players to get out of cover and move. not just to avoid enemy fire, but also to line up shots against vulnerable areas of the robot in both its quadruped and bipedal forms. It also has a defensive mechanism when damaged that projects arcs of energy that can overheat Sam's suit, further reinforcing how vulnerable you are to counterattack if you're not careful. The number of larger and more aggressive enemies that force boost movement increases throughout the first and second act, with the likes of the spike tanks, the Romanovs, and the Bayer robots. Now this is all still quite fun, but the problem for me is that enemy diversity stagnates pretty rapidly by the end of the first act, with the same enemy types thrown at you and often just placed out with gorgy grunts. While new sub-boss enemies appear, such as the buzzards, you fight each of them several times but largely independently. There's an argument for remixing these enemies in interesting ways to keep you on your toes. Romanovs and Bayas together? Or perhaps with spike tanks or an Argus? Naturally, I can imagine there are overheads with ensuring this all runs smoothly, given the sheer number of characters involved, be they friend or foe, running on a game originally intended for Xbox 360 and PS3. But still, it left me wanting something that really stretched my abilities as the game soldiers on. All the while, there are still aspects of Gideon's core mechanics that aren't being challenged. For example, what about creating enemies that deliberately target you while you're boosting? Or enemies that can only be attacked or even spotted whilst in augmented slow-mo? Or do more damage while you're in slow-mo? Sure, that sounds ridiculous, but I imagine they could come up with some sort of rationale for it. No new mechanics are introduced throughout, and as a result, the gameplay plateaus as early as the middle of Act 2, with a larger focus on the variety of different weapons you can use instead of finding new ways to challenge players and their use of the core mechanics. That isn't to say it doesn't happen at all. Two of the later bosses in the game, the Unknown from Act 3-6 and the Crystal Viper in Act 4-4, force players to move around differently. Each character has attacks that can quickly prove fatal, and given their rapid movement, you play more defensively, staying in cover, waiting for an opening, and then boosting out the way once it looks too risky. These stand out to me as some of the best moments in the game because it's forcing me to play the game defensively rather than offensively and completely change my strategy. Now, all that said, I still had a great time playing the game. The game doesn't outstay its welcome, but it's arguably a little short and forgettable in some segments. However, one valuable aspect is the replayability brought on by the variety of difficulty configurations. I'll readily concede playing through on normal, it's simply too easy for me, and I needed to play it again on hard to feel challenged. But I really appreciate both the introduction of God Hard mode after you complete the game the first time, but also the casual auto mode, which is offered straight away. Originally, I wasn't even going to give this thought, were it not for the recent resurgence of the easy mode discussion, thanks to the recent release of Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice.
This is why we can't have nice things, by the way!
And it seemed prudent to be playing through Vanquish at a time that this crops up, given it's a game that requires a lot of dexterity and fidelity, but provides a range of difficulty modes that cater to different types of players. The casual auto mode is admittedly not for me, but what's great about it is that it removes the need to handle the fidelity of aiming and instead prioritise movement, which can prove disorienting if you're boost sliding around an opponent. Plus, while it's a relatively minor issue, the game still enables players to earn most gameplay achievements or trophies, which is often an implicit method of punishing players on lower difficulty levels. What is valuable about all of this is that it opens this game up to players who perhaps couldn't play otherwise. Meanwhile, for others, there are increasingly more demanding modes for players that want that additional challenge. It works well for a game that only takes 3 to 5 hours to complete. You can go through it again on the next higher tier and test your limit. What is both fantastic and frustrating about this is that many of the points I made about remixed enemy layouts is a big part of God Hard mode, but the overall balancing of that mode is now so overwhelmingly difficult I'm kinda put off by it. Perhaps more disappointingly is that these elements are for the most part not even addressed in hard difficulty. Sure, the AI is a little more ruthless and health and damage values are tweaked, but the game only shifts into something completely different once you crank it up to maximum. It would be nice if I can balance those distinct difficulty vectors into a more rewarding experience. As always, difficulty is subjective. What is deemed normal by the developer could be beyond the competencies of others for a multitude of reasons. I respect when teams provide unique difficulty configurations to open a game up to a broader audience. At the end of the day, if people are entertained and get value for money, what's the problem?
You geese my easy mode in Dark Souls, you feckin' cowards!
Vanquish still holds ground as a novel take in the cover shooter genre. It's become a cult classic that arguably deserved better. There's still no cover shooter like it, and since then the genre largely cooled to a more consistent set of mechanics, but there's still space to innovate and one day we might see Vanquish's successor in the future. Thanks for watching this episode on Design Dive. It's the first of these videos for 2019, but it won't be the last. I'll be back soon with another patron-voted episode on the legacy of GoldenEye 007. But for now, let us bathe in the glory of my wonderfully supportive Patreons, with a special shout out to Integer Man, Katul Majmudar, and Michael Werner. Alright, I'm out. I'm gonna go pester someone about adding new difficulty modes to the adventure of Little Ralph. Just Google it. Seriously, you probably don't know what I'm talking about.